My name is Eleanor Thompson, and at 67 years old, I never imagined my son Richard would slap me across the face during Thanksgiving dinner. What he didn't know was that I had cameras recording everything. After decades of emotional abuse, something in me finally snapped. I sent that footage to his law firm and donated the $420,000 house I bought him to a shelter for abuse victims. Before I tell you my story, if you're watching this, please let me know where you're from and subscribe if my journey resonates with you. James and I got married when we were both 28. We had a wonderful marriage, full of love and respect. We tried for nearly a decade to have children before Richard came along when I was 37. James was over the moon about finally becoming a father. He worked as an engineer at a construction company, putting in long hours to provide for our family, while I balanced my job as a high school librarian with raising our son. Looking back now, I can see the warning signs were there from the beginning. Richard was our miracle baby, and James especially had a hard time saying no to him. When Richard was 5, I remember him throwing a tantrum in the grocery store because I wouldn't buy him candy. James slipped him a chocolate bar when he thought I wasn't looking. That became our pattern. I tried to set boundaries and James undermined them with indulgence. As Richard grew older, the entitlement only worsened. By his teenage years, he expected the newest phones, designer clothes, and a car on his 16th birthday. James gave him everything. When I expressed concern about spoiling him, James would say, "We struggled so long to have him, Eleanor. Let him enjoy life." I loved my husband dearly, but this was where we disagreed most strongly. When it came time for college, Richard got accepted to an expensive private university. Though we hadn't saved enough for 4 years of tuition, James insisted we would find a way. We took out a second mortgage on our house, and I picked up extra shifts cataloging books during summer breaks. Richard never worked during his college years. He joined a fraternity, went on spring break trips to Cancun, and graduated with honors in business and pre-law. We were so proud of him, despite the financial strain. Law school was another financial hurdle, but by then, Richard had met Patricia. She was studying to become a nurse, and I liked her immediately. She was grounded, hardworking, and seemed to bring out a better side of Richard. They dated throughout law school, and married shortly after he passed the bar exam. Patricia was already working as a registered nurse at the local hospital. When James died suddenly of a heart attack 15 years ago, I was devastated. Richard was 29 and establishing his career at a prestigious law firm in the city. During that difficult time, Richard actually stepped up. He helped me with the funeral arrangements and visited regularly during those first few months of overwhelming grief. I thought perhaps losing his father had matured him. About 2 years after James passed, Richard and Patricia welcomed my granddaughter Emma into the world. She was such a beautiful baby, with her mother's gentle eyes and her father's strong features. Becoming a grandmother gave me a new purpose after losing James. I babysit whenever they needed me and treasured every moment with Emma. When Emma was just starting to walk, Richard approached me about buying a house. Property values in their desired neighborhood were climbing rapidly, and with his student loans, they couldn't qualify for a large enough mortgage. Without hesitation, I sold the family home where Richard had grown up, where James and I had built our life together. I downsized to a small 2-bedroom condo, and gave Richard and Patricia $200,000 for their down payment. The house cost $420,000 total, and I was named on the deed alongside Richard, though I never intended to exercise any ownership rights. It was my gift to them, to give Emma a beautiful place to grow up. As the years passed, I noticed Richard becoming more dismissive of me. If I offered advice about Emma, he would snap, "We know how to raise our daughter, mother." If I brought food over, he would make comments about it not being organic or healthy enough. Our Sunday dinners became less frequent, and when we did gather, Richard would spend most of the time on his phone, barely engaging with me. Patricia tried to compensate for his behavior, always thanking me for gifts, sending Emma to call me weekly, and occasionally meeting me for lunch without Richard. During one of these lunches 3 years ago, Patricia confided that Richard had developed a gambling problem. He had started with sports betting and moved on to online poker. She was worried about their finances, but afraid to confront him as his temper had gotten worse. I was shocked but not entirely surprised. Richard had always had an addictive personality, evident in how he couldn't stop checking his work emails, or how he obsessed over fantasy football in his 20s. I offered Patricia money to help, but she refused, saying it would only enable him. She just needed someone to talk to. Around this time, Richard started asking me for loans more frequently. First, it was $5,000 for unexpected house repairs, then $8,000 for Emma's private school application. I always gave him what he asked for, though I suspected the money was covering gambling debts. I never saw any repairs on the house, and later learned from Patricia that they had decided against private school for Emma. The verbal abuse escalated gradually. What started as dismissive comments became outright insults. He called me senile when I misplaced my glasses. He told me my clothes looked cheap and outdated when I wore a blouse James had given me for our last anniversary together. He criticized my cooking, my driving, my opinions on current events. Everything I did or said became a target. When I finally worked up the courage to confront him about the gambling, he exploded. He called me a meddling old woman, and didn't speak to me for 2 months. I only got to see Emma because Patricia would bring her to my condo when Richard was working late. Those visits became my lifeline. Last year, Richard was passed over for partnership at his law firm. He never directly told me why, but Patricia mentioned during one of our phone calls that there had been complaints about his aggressive behavior with paralegals and administrative staff. His gambling worsened, and so did his treatment of Patricia and Emma. Patricia started calling me more frequently, sometimes just to talk, other times because she needed to get Emma out of the house during Richard's rages. Despite everything, I kept hoping my son would change. I kept making excuses for him. He was stressed. He was grieving his father, even after all these years. He was under pressure at work. I convinced myself that the sweet little boy I had raised was still in there somewhere, just buried under layers of adult problems. 2 months before this past Thanksgiving, I had knee replacement surgery. It was a difficult recovery for someone my age, and I had hoped Richard might show some concern. He visited once, briefly, complaining about the hospital parking fees, and leaving after less than 20 minutes. Patricia and Emma came several times, bringing flowers and homemade cards. Patricia helped me set up my condo for easier navigation during recovery, and arranged for grocery delivery. As Thanksgiving approached, Patricia called to warn me that Richard had been particularly volatile. He had lost a significant amount of money on a football game, and had been drinking more than usual. She suggested canceling our traditional family Thanksgiving, but I insisted we continue. Holidays had always been important in our family, and I clung to the hope that the familiar traditions might bring out the better side of my son. Looking back now, I realize I was living in denial, desperately trying to preserve an illusion of family harmony that had long since shattered. But everything changed that Thanksgiving day, when my son crossed a line I never imagined he would cross. My knee was still giving me trouble as Thanksgiving approached. The doctor had warned me that full recovery could take up to 3 months for someone my age, but I was determined to host our family dinner, as I had every year since James passed. I had just graduated from using a walker to a cane, and though every step sent shooting pain through my leg, I refused to let it stop me from preparing the traditional meal my granddaughter loved. 3 days before Thanksgiving, my friend Margaret drove me to the grocery store. Margaret and I had been friends since our children were in elementary school together. Her son Michael had moved to California years ago, but unlike Richard, he called his mother weekly and flew home for holidays when he could. "Eleanor, you're limping worse today," Margaret observed as we slowly made our way through the produce section. I was leaning heavily on my shopping cart, using it almost like a walker. "It's just the weather change," I lied, reaching for a bag of cranberries. "The doctor said that's normal." Margaret gave me a skeptical look. "Why don't you ask Patricia to host this year? I'm sure she'd understand, given your surgery." I shook my head firmly. "Patricia works such long shifts at the hospital. Besides, I want to do this. Emma expects her grandma's sweet potato casserole." We continued shopping, my cart gradually filling with ingredients for the feast I planned to prepare. Turkey, potatoes, green beans, pumpkin pie filling. All the traditional dishes James had loved, that I had taught Richard to appreciate, that now delighted Emma. As we reached the checkout, Margaret touched my arm gently. "Eleanor, there's something else. I don't mean to overstep, but I've been worried about you." Patricia called me last week. My heart sank. What did she say? She's concerned about Richard's behavior toward you. She said he's been making cruel comments belittling you. And she's worried about his temper with the holiday stress. I busied myself unloading groceries onto the conveyor belt. Richard's just going through a difficult time at work. Eleanor, Margaret's voice was firm. Patricia mentioned that he screamed at you on the phone last week. She could hear him from across the room. I remembered that call all too well. ID phoned to ask what time they wanted to come for Thanksgiving dinner, and Richard had erupted, shouting that I was micromanaging and that they'd arrive when they arrived. ID held the phone away from my ear, his rage so intense it felt like a physical force. What if, Margaret suggested carefully, you considered installing a security camera, just as a precaution? My son got me one of those doorbell cameras last Christmas. They're very simple to set up. A camera? In my own home? To monitor my son. The idea seemed absurd, invasive. Not to monitor. For protection. Eleanor, I care about you. Patricia'd be mortified if she knew I told you she called, but she's worried. We both are. I wanted to dismiss Margaret's concerns, but something stopped me. Perhaps it was the memory of Richard's increasingly unpredictable outbursts. Or maybe it was the fact that Patricia, who rarely complained about Richard to others, had felt concerned enough to call my friend. The next day, Margaret arrived with 2 small wireless cameras and helped me set them up. One in the dining room, discreetly positioned on a bookshelf among family photos. Another in the kitchen, hidden among the decorative plates on my display shelf. I felt ridiculous and guilty, like I was spying on my own family. But Margaret showed me how the footage would be stored on my phone, emphasizing that I would probably never need to view it. It's just peace of mind, she assured me. Like having a fire extinguisher. You hope you never use it, but you're glad it's there if you need it. The day before Thanksgiving, I received another troubling call from Patricia. Eleanor, she said. Her voice hushed as if she was calling from somewhere Richard couldn't hear her. I just wanted to warn you. Richard's in a particularly bad mood. He lost a case yesterday, and he's been drinking since he got home. Should we cancel? I asked, though the turkey was already thawing, and ID spent the morning baking pies despite the pain in my knee. No, Patricia said quickly. That would only make things worse. He needs the normalcy of family tradition right now. Just, maybe don't bring up work. Or the house. Or anything about money. The list of forbidden topics made my stomach knot with anxiety. I'll be careful, I promised. After we hung up, I took extra pain medication. I knew I'd be on my feet most of the day preparing the meal, and I needed to be clear-headed and mobile for my family. I spent that Wednesday cooking everything that could be prepared in advance. The pumpkin pies. The cranberry sauce. The dough for the rolls. Throughout the day, I had to sit frequently, elevating my knee to reduce the swelling. By evening, it had nearly doubled in size, but I pressed on. That night, I set the dining table with my good china. The set James and I had received as a wedding gift. I placed autumn-colored candles in the center and arranged cloth napkins in silver rings. I wanted everything to be perfect, believing somehow that a beautiful setting might inspire beautiful behavior. Before going to bed, I checked the cameras using the app on my phone. Both were working properly, their small green lights blinking steadily. I still felt a twist of shame at having installed them, but pushed the feeling aside. As I settled into bed that night, I took out our old family photo album. There was Richard at 5, sitting on James' shoulders at the state fair. Richard at 10, proudly holding up a science fair ribbon. Richard at 18, handsome in his graduation cap and gown, his arms around James and me. I traced my finger over my late husband's face, missing him acutely. Oh, James, I whispered to the empty room. What happened to our boy? Sleep eluded me that night. I tossed and turned, rehearsing conversations in my head, planning how to keep the peace during dinner. By the time dawn broke, I was exhausted but resolute. This Thanksgiving would be different. We would find our way back to being a loving family. I would make it happen through sheer force of will and the magic of tradition. As I carefully made my way to the kitchen, my knee protesting with each step, my phone rang. It was Margaret, checking in as she promised she would. How are you feeling today? She asked. Ready as I'll ever be. I replied, trying to sound more confident than I felt. Remember what we discussed. If anything happens, anything at all that makes you uncomfortable, call me immediately, day or night. I promised I would, though I had no intention of disrupting her Thanksgiving with her daughter and grandchildren who were visiting from Chicago. The morning passed in a blur of cooking. The turkey went into the oven. Green bean casserole was assembled. Sweet potatoes were mashed with brown sugar and topped with marshmallows, just as Emma liked them. I moved slowly between kitchen and dining room, relying heavily on my cane, taking short breaks to elevate my increasingly swollen knee. At 2 o'clock, I took a shower and changed into a burgundy dress I'd bought specially for the occasion. I applied light makeup, put on the pearl earrings James had given me for our 30th anniversary, and practiced my warmest smile in the mirror. At 3:30, the doorbell rang. I took a deep breath, said a quick prayer for peace, and went to welcome my family, unaware that the coming hours would change everything forever. I opened the door with my practiced smile firmly in place. Emma rushed in first, 8 years old and bursting with energy, her dark hair in 2 neat braids. "Grandma!" She wrapped her arms around my waist, nearly knocking me off balance. "I made you a card." "Careful with Grandma, Emma," Patricia cautioned, stepping in behind her daughter. She was wearing a lovely green sweater that brought out her eyes, but I noticed immediately how tired she looked. There were shadows beneath her eyes and a tightness to her smile. She hugged me gently. "Happy Thanksgiving, Eleanor. The house smells wonderful." Richard entered last, not bothering to close the door behind him. I had to hobble over and shut it myself. He was dressed in expensive slacks and a button-down shirt, his dark hair neatly combed, looking every bit the successful lawyer had worked so hard to become. But his eyes were bloodshot, and he didn't smile as he gave me a cursory nod. "Place looks dusty," were his first words, running a finger along my entryway table. "You should hire a cleaning service if you can't keep up anymore." "Richard," Patricia said quietly, "your mother just had surgery." He shrugged and moved past me into the living room, not offering a hug or even a handshake. I swallowed my hurt and focused on Emma, who was proudly presenting me with a handmade card featuring a crayon drawing of a turkey wearing a pilgrim hat. "It's beautiful, sweetheart," I said, genuinely delighted. "Let me put it right here on the mantel so everyone can see it." We moved to the living room where I'd set out a cheese plate and crackers. Patricia immediately offered to help me in the kitchen, but I insisted she relax. Richard had already poured himself a glass of the expensive whiskey he kept at my house specifically for his visits. He was scrolling through his phone, barely acknowledging our presence. "So Emma," I said brightly, "how is school going? Are you enjoying 3rd grade?" Emma launched into an enthusiastic description of her science project about butterflies, her words tumbling over each other in excitement. Richard didn't look up from his phone, but Patricia smiled encouragingly at her daughter, though I caught her casting worried glances at her husband. For a while, things remained relatively peaceful. Emma chatted about school, Patricia asked about my recovery, and Richard remained absorbed in his phone, occasionally getting up to refill his whiskey glass. By the time I announced dinner was ready, he was on his 3rd drink. The dining room looked beautiful, if I do say so myself. The candles cast a warm glow over the table, the china gleamed, and the food was arranged in my best serving dishes. Emma gasped in delight, and even Patricia looked impressed. "It's just like a restaurant, Grandma," Emma exclaimed. "It's a lot of work for someone who can barely walk," Richard commented, taking his usual seat at the head of the table. "We could have just ordered takeout." "I wanted to make our traditional meal," I said, carefully lowering myself into my chair, trying not to wince at the pain in my knee. "Emma, would you like to say grace like you did last year?" Emma nodded solemnly and we all bowed our heads, even Richard, though he kept one hand on his phone. Emma said a sweet, simple prayer, thanking God for family and food. When she finished, we began passing dishes around. The first real tension arose when Richard took a bite of turkey and frowned. "It's dry," he announced. "You always overcook it." "I think it's delicious, Eleanor," Patricia said quickly. "Everything is perfect." "So Richard," I said, attempting to change the subject, "how are things at the firm?" The moment the words left my mouth, I remembered Patricia's warning not to mention work. I saw her stiffen. Richard's face darkened. Why do you ask? Has Patricia been talking to you about my job? No, I said hurriedly. Just making conversation. Because if she's been complaining about my hours again. Richard, I haven't said anything, Patricia interjected, her voice tight. Please, let's just enjoy dinner. He stabbed at his sweet potatoes aggressively. The firm is fine. Not that you understand anything about corporate law. I'm sure it's very demanding, I offered. Demanding? He laughed harshly. You have no idea. You spent your career stamping books in a high school library. Try representing clients worth billions sometime. I felt the sting of his dismissal but forced myself to remain calm. We all contribute in different ways, Richard. Emma, sensing the tension, piped up. Daddy, can I tell Grandma about my A on my spelling test? Richard's expression softened momentarily as he looked at his daughter. Go ahead, Princess. Emma launched into a story about her perfect spelling test, and for a few minutes the atmosphere lightened. We made it through the main course without further incident, though Richard continued to drink steadily. As I served pumpkin pie, Richard checked his watch ostentatiously. We can't stay late. I have an early meeting tomorrow. But tomorrow is Friday after Thanksgiving, I said, confused. I thought your firm was closed. Some of us actually have to work, Mother. We can't all live off Dad's pension. The injustice of this statement took my breath away. ID worked full-time until retirement and managed our household finances carefully. James' pension was modest, and ID given a significant portion of our savings to Richard for his house down payment. Actually, Patricia said carefully, I thought we might stay and help Eleanor clean up. She shouldn't be on her feet too long with her knee. Richard snorted. Always the nurse, aren't you? Maybe you should move in with her if you're so concerned. Richard, please, Patricia pleaded quietly. Not today. Emma was looking increasingly uncomfortable, pushing her pie around her plate without eating. Can I be excused? She asked in a small voice. No, Richard said sharply. Finish your food. Your grandmother went to all this trouble, apparently. It's okay, Emma, I said. You can be excused if you're full.
Dont un d'Hermine me, Richard snapped.
She's my daughter, and I said she stays at the table. Richard, I said, struggling to keep my voice even. She's just a child. If she's uncomfortable. Uncomfortable. Richard interrupted, his voice rising. You want to talk about uncomfortable? How about paying for a house you can't afford, because your mother guilt you into a neighborhood beyond your means? Patricia looked mortified. Richard, stop. Please. But he was just getting started. You know what, Mother? I've been meaning to talk to you about that house. Since your name is on the deed, you should be contributing to the property taxes. They're almost $10,000 a year now. I was stunned. Richard, I gave you the down payment as a gift. You know that was all I could afford after selling our family home. A gift with strings attached, he said bitterly. Like everything with you. Always holding it over my head. How much you sacrificed for me. I've never said that, I protested, feeling increasingly distressed. You didn't have to say it. It's in every disappointed look, every sigh when I can't make it to your birthday dinner, every comment about how hard you and Dad worked to put me through school. Emma had started to cry silently, tears rolling down her cheeks. Patricia put an arm around her, whispering something in her ear. Take her to the living room, Richard ordered Patricia. This conversation isn't for children. No, Patricia said, a rare note of defiance in her voice. If you're going to do this now, Emma and I are going to wait in the car. Keys, please. Richard ignored her, turning back to me. You've always thought I wasn't good enough, haven't you? Always comparing me to Dad's impossible standard. That's not true, I said, my own voice rising now. Your father and I were always proud of you. We gave you everything we could. Everything except approval, he spat. Nothing was ever enough for you. Patricia stood, still holding Emma close. Richard, give me the car keys. Now. Enraged at being interrupted, Richard turned on his wife. Sit down, Patricia. You're not going anywhere until we're finished here. Don't speak to her that way, I said, a lifetime of restraint finally breaking. She's your wife, not your employee. And if anyone has a right to feel disappointed, It's Patricia. And me. The way you've been treating us both is shameful. Richard's face contorted with rage. He stood abruptly, knocking over his wine glass. Red liquid spread across my white tablecloth like blood. Shameful? You want to talk about shameful? His voice had risen to a shout now. How about a mother who can't mind her own business? Who meddles in my marriage, my career, my finances? Who never thinks I'm good enough? That's not true, I repeated, remaining seated, trying to project a calm I didn't feel. I've always believed in you, Richard. But I won't sit here and watch you bully your wife and daughter. Something in my composed response seemed to infuriate him further. He loomed over me, his face flushed with alcohol and anger. You think you're so perfect, don't you? Saint Eleanor, the martyr. The perfect wife, the perfect mother. You know what? Dad complained about you. All the time. How controlling you were. How you never let him enjoy his success. How you pinched pennies and made him feel guilty for every dollar he spent. This was a lie. A cruel fabrication meant to wound me where I was most vulnerable. In my memories of my loving marriage. James and I had our disagreements, certainly, but we had always been partners, united in our love for each other and our son. The wine-soaked tablecloth, Emma's tears, Patricia's drawn face, the pain radiating from my knee, Richard's twisted expression, it all swirled together in a moment of profound clarity. This was not a rough patch. This was who my son had become. Richard, I said quietly, I think you should leave now. The dining room fell silent after my request. Richard's face went through a rapid series of emotions: disbelief, anger, and then a cold fury that made my heart race. He leaned forward, placing both hands on the table, looming over me. You're kicking me out, he said, his voice dangerously quiet. From Thanksgiving dinner? After I drove all the way across town to be here? After I took time away from work to humor your pathetic need for family togetherness? Patricia had her arm around Emma, who was still crying softly. Richard, please, she said. Let's just go. We can talk about this tomorrow when everyone's calmer. He whirled on her. Shut up. You're always taking her side. I'm not taking sides, Patricia said, her voice trembling. I just don't want Emma to see this. See what? Richard demanded. See her grandmother manipulating everyone as usual? See how she tries to turn you against me? See how nothing I do is ever good enough for her? I remained seated, my hands folded in my lap to stop them from shaking. Richard, you're upset and you've had too much to drink. Please, let's not say things we'll regret. Go home, get some sleep, and we can talk when you're feeling more yourself. More myself. He laughed, a harsh, ugly sound. This is myself, Mother. This is who I am when I'm not pretending to be the perfect son you always wanted. I never asked for perfection, I said quietly. Just kindness. Respect. Respect? He spat the word. What about respect for me? For my position? Do you have any idea what it's like being passed over for partner while idiots with half my talent get promoted? Do you know what it's like having a wife who spends more time worrying about her patients and her mother-in-law than supporting my career? Patricia gasped. That's not fair, Richard. I've always supported you. By running to my mother every time we have a disagreement? By undermining my authority with Emma? By nagging me about my perfectly normal stress relief activities? I knew he was referring to his gambling, though Emma wouldn't understand the reference. The situation was deteriorating rapidly, and I needed to protect both Patricia and Emma. Patricia, I said as calmly as I could, why don't you take Emma into the kitchen? There's ice cream in the freezer for her. Richard slammed his fist on the table, making the dishes jump. Nobody is going anywhere. We're going to finish this conversation right now. Emma flinched at the loud noise, pressing herself against her mother. Patricia stood, pulling Emma up with her. We're going to the car, Richard. Give me the keys or we're calling an Uber. Sit down, Richard shouted. Don't you dare speak to them that way in my home, I said, my own voice rising despite my efforts to stay calm. Using my cane, I pushed myself to my feet, wincing at the pain in my knee. If you can't control yourself, you need to leave. Now. What happened next seemed to unfold in slow motion. Richard's face contorted with rage. He stepped toward me, his right hand raised, and before I could react, he slapped me hard across the face. The force of the blow knocked me sideways, and I would have fallen if I hadn't grabbed the edge of the table. The sound of the slap echoed in the sudden silence. My cheek burned with pain, and I tasted blood where my teeth had cut the inside of my mouth. For a moment, no one moved or spoke. I raised my hand to my face, feeling the heat of what would surely become a bruise. Through tears of pain and shock, I saw Emma's horrified expression, Patricia's hand covering her mouth in disbelief. Richard himself looked momentarily stunned, as if he couldn't believe what he'd just done. Then his expression hardened again. "You deserved that," he said, his voice shaking. "You've been asking for it for years." Patricia finally broke from her frozen state. "Emma, go to the living room right now," she ordered in a voice that brooked no argument. For once, Emma obeyed without question, running from the dining room. "Richard," Patricia said, her voice icy with controlled fury, "get the car keys out of your pocket and put them on the table. Now." To my surprise, Richard complied, perhaps shocked by his own actions. Patricia snatched the keys and turned to me. "Eleanor, I'm so sorry," she said, her eyes filled with tears. "We're leaving. I'll call you later." I nodded, still unable to speak, my hand pressed to my throbbing cheek. Patricia hurried to the living room to collect Emma. Richard stood there, breathing heavily, something like awareness beginning to dawn in his eyes. "Mother," he began, his tone suddenly uncertain. "I didn't mean." I found my voice at last. "Get out of my house," I said clearly, despite the pain in my jaw. "Get out now." "You're overreacting," he said, but there was a defensive note in his voice. "It was just a slap. After everything I've done for you." "Everything you've done for me?" I repeated incredulously. "Like taking the money I gave you for a house? Like belittling me at every opportunity? Like slapping your elderly mother across the face after she cooked Thanksgiving dinner for you despite being in pain from surgery?" Patricia returned with Emma, who was clutching her backpack and looking terrified. "We're leaving," Patricia announced. She wouldn't look at Richard. "Emma, say goodbye to Grandma." Emma ran to me and hugged me around the waist. "I'm sorry, Grandma," she whispered. "Are you okay?" My heart broke for her. No child should ever have to witness such violence, especially from a parent. "I'm fine, sweetheart," I assured her, though it was far from the truth. "It's not your fault." "Not at all." Richard grabbed his coat from the chair where he'd tossed it earlier. "This is ridiculous," he muttered. "A complete overreaction." "You'll call tomorrow to apologize, Mother. You always do." He stormed toward the door, Patricia and Emma following at a distance. At the threshold, he turned back. "And I still expect you to contribute to those property taxes. It's only fair, since your name is on the deed." With that parting shot, he walked out. Patricia gave me one last apologetic look, before closing the door behind them. I stood in my dining room, surrounded by the ruins of Thanksgiving dinner. The turkey had grown cold. The candles had burned low. Wine stained the tablecloth like an accusation. Slowly, painfully, I lowered myself back into my chair, my entire body trembling with shock and pain. For several minutes, I sat there, unable to move, barely able to think. Then, almost mechanically, I reached for my phone. With shaking fingers, I opened the security camera app and watched the footage of what had just happened. There it was in high-definition clarity. My son, towering over me, his hand striking my face with deliberate force. The look of rage on his face. The sound of the impact. My stunned reaction. I watched it 3 times, part of me still unable to believe what had happened. Then I forwarded the video to my own email as a backup and sat in silence. Tears finally spilling down my bruised cheek as the enormity of what had occurred sank in. My son had hit me. The little boy I had cradled in my arms, the teenager I had driven to soccer practice, the young man I had helped through law school, had struck me in anger. A line had been crossed that could never be uncrossed. As the shock began to wear off, another emotion took its place, resolve. For too long, I had excused Richard's behavior, had enabled his worst impulses out of misguided maternal love. I had allowed him to treat me, Patricia, and even Emma with growing disrespect and cruelty. No more. At 67 years old, I was finally ready to stand up for myself. Richard needed consequences, and for once I was prepared to ensure he faced them. I don't know how long I sat at that ruined Thanksgiving table. The candles burned out. The food congealed. My phone rang several times, but I couldn't bring myself to answer it. My cheek throbbed, a constant reminder of what had happened. Eventually, I managed to text Margaret. "Something happened. Can you come over?" She arrived 20 minutes later, letting herself in with the spare key I'd given her years ago. When she saw my face, she gasped. "Eleanor. Oh my God, what happened?" I couldn't speak. Instead, I handed her my phone with the security camera footage queued up. She watched in horrified silence, her hand covering her mouth. When it ended, she put the phone down and embraced me gently, mindful of my injuries. "We're calling the police," she said firmly. "No," I responded immediately. "I can't do that to him. He's still my son. Eleanor, he assaulted you. In your own home. On Thanksgiving." "I know," I said quietly. "And there will be consequences. But not the police." "Not yet." Margaret helped me clean up the dining room, though I could barely focus on the task. We wrapped leftovers neither of us had any appetite for, washed dishes in silence, and finally settled in the living room with cups of tea. My mind was racing, considering options, consequences, next steps. "Patricia called while you were in the bathroom," Margaret told me. "She left a voicemail. Do you want to listen to it?" I nodded, and Margaret played it on speakerphone. Patricia's voice was thick with tears. "Eleanor, it's Patricia. I'm so sorry about what happened. Emma and I are at a hotel. I couldn't go home with him after what he did. I've never seen him hit anyone before, but I've been afraid it might happen. He's been getting worse. Please call me when you can. I'm so worried about you." The message confirmed what I'd suspected. Richard's violence wasn't as shocking to Patricia as it had been to me. She had seen warning signs I had ignored or excused. "You should call her back," Margaret urged. "Tomorrow," I said. "I need time to think." Margaret stayed the night in my guest room, refusing to leave me alone. I was grateful for her presence, though sleep eluded me. My mind kept replaying the moment of impact, the look in Richard's eyes, the sound of Emma crying. The next morning my face was visibly bruised. Margaret insisted I see a doctor, both for my face and my knee, which had swollen alarmingly after being on my feet all day cooking. The doctor documented the facial injury, asking carefully how it had happened. When I told her, she gave me information about elder abuse resources, which I accepted mechanically. After the doctor's appointment, I asked Margaret to drive me to my attorney's office. Howard Klein had been handling my legal affairs since James died. He was shocked by my appearance but maintained his professional demeanor as I explained what had happened and what I wanted to do about it. "Eleanor," he said cautiously, "are you sure about this? It's a drastic step." "I'm sure, Howard. I need to see the paperwork for the house. I know my name is on the deed." Howard pulled the file and confirmed what I already knew. While Richard lived in the house and made the mortgage payments, I was technically a co-owner since I had provided the down payment and insisted on keeping my name on the deed, a precaution James had advised before he passed away. "What are my options?" I asked. Howard outlined several possibilities, from removing my name from the deed to forcing a sale of the property. I listened carefully, taking notes despite my shaking hands. As we were finishing our meeting, my phone rang. It was Patricia. I excused myself to take the call. "Eleanor." She sounded exhausted and frightened. "I've been so worried. How are you?" "I've been better," I answered honestly. "Where are you and Emma?" "Still at the hotel." I don't think I can go back, Eleanor. Not after what happened." Her voice broke. "But I'm afraid. He controls all our finances. My nursing salary isn't enough for rent in this area, and Emma's school." "Patricia," I interrupted gently, "there's something I need to tell you. Something I should have said a long time ago. Has Richard ever been physical with you or Emma before?" The silence that followed told me everything I needed to know. "Not with Emma," she finally said, her voice barely audible. "He's never hit her. But me, there have been incidents. Grabbing my arm hard enough to leave bruises. Throwing things near me but not at me. Punching walls. I kept telling myself it wasn't really abuse because he never actually hit me, but I was afraid it was just a matter of time. My heart sank. I had failed not only myself but Patricia too, by ignoring the signs, by enabling Richard's behavior for so long. I want you to listen carefully, I told her. I'm meeting with my attorney right now about the house. I want you and Emma to have somewhere safe to stay. Can you meet me tomorrow? We need to talk about next steps. The house. Patricia sounded confused. What do you mean? I'll explain everything tomorrow. Just know that you're not alone anymore. Neither of us is. After hanging up, I turned back to Howard. I've made my decision, I said with more confidence than I felt. I want to donate the house to a domestic violence shelter organization. Can you research which ones might be able to use such a property? Howard looked startled but nodded. It will take some legal maneuvering, but it's possible. Are you absolutely certain this is what you want to do, Eleanor? More certain than I've been about anything in years, I replied. That evening, I received a call from a number I didn't recognize. Against Margaret's advice, I answered it. Mrs. Thompson? This is George Harrington from Brewster, Harrington and Walsh. It took me a moment to place the name. George was a senior partner at Richard's law firm. I apologize for calling you on a holiday weekend, but I was hoping we might talk about Richard. My pulse quickened. What about Richard? He's been struggling at the firm lately. There have been complaints about his behavior, his temperament. We value him as an attorney, but we're concerned. I was hoping you might have some insight. This was my opening, a chance to hold Richard accountable in a way he would truly feel. But I needed time to consider my next move carefully. Mr. Harrington, I appreciate your call. This is a difficult situation. Could we possibly meet in person early next week? He agreed readily, and we set a time for Monday morning. Over the weekend, I made several difficult decisions. First, I met with Kathleen Miller, a domestic violence advocate Margaret had connected me with. Kathleen helped me understand the patterns of abuse I had been subjected to and, more importantly, had enabled through my reluctance to set boundaries. It's very common for mothers to excuse their children's behavior, Kathleen explained kindly. But you didn't cause this, and you can't fix it. Richard needs professional help, and there need to be consequences for his actions. I also met with Patricia and Emma at their hotel. Emma ran to hug me, her eyes wide at the visible bruise on my face. Does it hurt, Grandma? She asked. A little, I admitted. But I'm going to be okay. And so are you and your mom. While Emma watched TV, Patricia and I talked in low voices about what had been happening in their home. The gambling had worsened. Richard had been drinking more. His rage episodes were more frequent. Patricia had been planning to leave for months, but was afraid of what Richard might do. He keeps saying he'll take Emma away from me if I ever try to leave, she confessed, tears streaming down her face. That he'll tell the court I'm an unfit mother. That no judge would rule against a successful attorney in favor of a nurse. My determination hardened. That's not going to happen, I assured her. I have the video, and I have resources. We're going to get through this together. On Sunday night, I sat alone in my condo, having finally convinced Margaret to return to her own home. My bruise had darkened to a deep purple. My knee was still swollen and painful, but my mind was clearer than it had been in years. I copied the security footage to a USB drive Howard had provided. I drafted a careful email to George Harrington. I looked at old photos of Richard as a boy, trying to reconcile that smiling child with the man who had struck me in rage. Finally, I called a locksmith and had all my locks changed, just in case Richard still had a key. I didn't think he would come to my home again so soon, but Kathleen had emphasized the importance of physical security. As I lay in bed that night, I thought of James. What would he think of what had happened? What would he think of what I was about to do? I tried, James, I whispered into the darkness. I tried so hard to be a good mother. But I can't help Richard by protecting him from consequences anymore. I think I finally understand that. Sleep came eventually, and with it, a sense of resolution. The path ahead would be difficult and painful, but for the first time in years I felt I was finally doing the right thing. For Patricia and Emma, for myself, and even, ultimately, for Richard. Monday morning arrived with a clarity I hadn't felt in years. The weight of denial had lifted, replaced by purpose. I dressed carefully in a navy blue suit James had always liked, applied makeup that partially concealed my bruise, and took a taxi to the offices of Brewster, Harrington, and Walsh. The receptionist led me to a conference room where George Harrington was waiting. He was an imposing man in his 60s with silver hair and a carefully tailored suit. He rose when I entered, his expression changing momentarily when he noticed my bruised face. "Mrs. Thompson, thank you for coming," he said, shaking my hand. "Can I offer you coffee? Water?" "Water would be fine, thank you," I replied, settling myself in a chair, placing my purse containing the USB drive on the table. Once we had exchanged pleasantries, George got to the point. "Mrs. Thompson, as I mentioned on the phone, we've had some concerns about Richard's behavior at the firm. There have been complaints from support staff about aggressive outbursts, inappropriate language. We've also noticed some irregularities in his billing hours. Nothing definitive yet, but concerning." I listened carefully, nodding occasionally. When he finished, I took a deep breath. "Mr. Harrington, what I'm about to tell you and show you is extremely difficult for me as a mother. But I believe it's necessary." I removed the USB drive from my purse and placed it on the table. This contains security footage from my home taken on Thanksgiving Day. It shows my son, your colleague, slapping me across the face during a family dinner. George's expression shifted from professional concern to shock. "Mrs. Thompson, Please," I interrupted gently. "Let me finish. This wasn't an isolated incident. Richard has been verbally abusive to me for years. He's been financially exploitative. And I recently learned from his wife that she has experienced similar treatment, though he had never physically struck either of us until Thanksgiving." I pushed the USB drive across the table. "I'm not sharing this to hurt Richard's career. I'm sharing it because I believe he needs help, serious help, before his behavior escalates further. And because I believe your firm should be aware of the man you're considering for partnership." George picked up the drive, his expression grave. "May I?" he asked, gesturing to the laptop on the conference table. I nodded, and he inserted the drive, opening the video file. I couldn't bring myself to watch it again, so I looked down at my hands while the sound played. Richard's angry voice, the sharp crack of the slap, Emma's crying. When it ended, George closed the laptop, his face ashen. "Mrs. Thompson, I hardly know what to say. This is deeply disturbing. Rest assured, we take this kind of behavior extremely seriously." "I understand this puts you in a difficult position," I said. "Richard is a talented attorney. But he needs help, and he needs consequences." "Indeed," George agreed. "We have a clear code of conduct that applies to our attorney's personal, as well as professional behavior. This is a clear violation." We talked for another half hour about next steps. George explained that there would be an internal review. Richard would likely be suspended during the investigation. There would be requirements for counseling and anger management before any consideration of reinstatement. As I left the law firm, my phone buzzed with multiple text messages from Richard. Somehow, he already knew about my meeting. His texts grew increasingly threatening as I scrolled through them. "How dare you go behind my back to my firm? You'll regret this, mother. I'm coming over to discuss this betrayal. Be there." The last message sent a chill through me. I immediately called Patricia. "Richard knows I met with his firm," I told her when she answered. "He's threatening to come to my condo. Are you and Emma somewhere safe?" "Yes," she assured me. "We're still at the hotel, and he doesn't know which one. Eleanor, be careful. Maybe you should go to Margaret's." "I'll be fine," I said with more confidence than I felt. "I'm calling a security company today, and I'm meeting Howard this afternoon about the house." My next stop was indeed Howard's office, where we finalized the paperwork to donate the house to New Beginnings, a local organization that provided housing for survivors of domestic abuse. Howard had confirmed that as a co-owner, I had the legal right to make this decision, though Richard could potentially contest it in court. "He'll be furious," Howard warned. "I know," I acknowledged. "But it's the right thing to do. And Patricia and Emma need somewhere safe away from him." Howard promised to expedite the paperwork. As I was leaving his office, my phone rang. It was Margaret, sounding frantic. "Eleanor, Richard just showed up at my house looking for you. He was shouting, demanding to know where you were. I had to threaten to call the police before he would leave. My hand shook as I gripped the phone. Are you all right? I'm fine, just shaken. But you can't go home, Eleanor. He'll be waiting for you. She was right. I called a security company from the cab and arranged for an immediate system installation at my condo. Then I checked into a hotel under Margaret's name, just to be safe. That evening, Patricia called with news. Richard came to the hotel where we were staying yesterday. Somehow he figured it out. The front desk called our room to say he was demanding to know which room we were in. We had to sneak out the back and find another hotel.
I'm terrified, Eleanor.
My resolve hardened further. It's going to be okay. The house paperwork is being processed. New Beginnings has agreed to let you and Emma stay there once everything's finalized. And I've spoken to a friend who's a detective about getting restraining orders for all of us. The next few days passed in a blur of legal meetings, security arrangements, and anxious phone calls. Richard's law firm placed him on immediate suspension pending investigation. He responded by hiring his own attorney and threatening to sue both the firm and me for defamation. Howard called with news that the house donation was proceeding but that Richard had been notified as required by law and was contesting the transfer. It will delay things, Howard explained. But given the circumstances and the security footage, I believe the court will ultimately rule in your favor, especially since the house will be used for domestic violence survivors. A week after Thanksgiving, I finally returned to my condo, now equipped with a state-of-the-art security system. I had barely settled in when the doorbell rang. The security monitor showed Richard standing at my door, looking disheveled and angry. I pressed the intercom button. Richard, I have a restraining order. You need to leave immediately. You can't hide behind legal papers, Mother, he shouted, loud enough for the neighbors to hear. You've destroyed my career, my reputation, over one slap, after everything I've done for you. Sir, you need to leave the premises now, said a voice behind him. I watched on the monitor as two police officers approached. Someone, perhaps a neighbor, had called them. Richard turned to confront the officers, gesturing wildly. I couldn't hear everything, but his body language was aggressive, confrontational. When one officer placed a hand on his arm, Richard jerked away violently. Within moments he was being handcuffed and led to a police car, still shouting about betrayal and ingratitude. The following day, I received a call from George Harrington. Mrs. Thompson, I thought you should know that after yesterday's incident and arrest, the partners have voted unanimously to terminate Richard's employment effective immediately. We simply cannot have someone with his temperament representing our firm. It gave me no pleasure to hear this news. Despite everything, Richard was still my son, and I grieved for the man he had become, so different from the boy I had raised and loved. 2 weeks later, a local newspaper ran a small article about the donation of a $420,000 house to New Beginnings. I hadn't wanted publicity, but the organization had asked permission to issue a press release, hoping it might inspire similar donations. I agreed on the condition that my name was mentioned only as an anonymous donor, and that Richard's connection to the house wasn't disclosed. The article brought unwanted attention anyway. Richard's former colleagues made the connection. Rumors spread. Richard's reputation in the legal community, already damaged by his suspension and arrest, suffered further. Patricia filed for divorce and full custody of Emma. Richard contested it bitterly, but with the video evidence and his recent arrest, his case was weak. The court granted Patricia temporary full custody with supervised visitation for Richard, contingent on his completion of anger management classes. Through it all, I maintained my resolve, though it wasn't easy. There were nights I lay awake, wondering if I had done the right thing, if there had been some other way to handle the situation that wouldn't have such devastating consequences for my son. But then I would remember the look in Emma's eyes as she watched her father strike her grandmother, and I knew I couldn't have continued enabling his behavior. 3 months after Thanksgiving, the house transfer was finalized despite Richard's objections. Patricia and Emma moved in temporarily, while the organization prepared to use it as transitional housing for other families. I visited them there once, finding it strange to be a guest in the house I had helped purchase. Emma showed me her room, chattering happily about her new school and friends, seeming more relaxed than I had seen her in years. "Thank you, Eleanor," Patricia said as we sat in the kitchen that had once been hers. "For everything. I don't know what would have happened if you hadn't taken a stand." "I just wish I had done it sooner," I replied, thinking of all the years I had made excuses for Richard's behavior, all the warning signs I had ignored. As spring approached, bringing new growth and renewal to the world outside, I found myself surprisingly at peace with my decisions. Richard was facing consequences for his actions, perhaps for the first time in his life. Patricia and Emma were safe. And I was learning, even at 67, that it's never too late to stand up for yourself and those you love. 6 months after that fateful Thanksgiving, the bruise on my face had long since faded, but the changes in my life remained profound. My weekly therapy sessions with Dr. Lorraine Miller had become an anchor in my new routine. At first, I had resisted the idea of therapy, believing at my age I should be able to handle my problems myself. But Dr. Miller had gently helped me understand the patterns of enabling behavior I had engaged in for decades. It's very common for parents, especially mothers, to make excuses for their children's behavior, she explained during one session. "You wanted to believe the best of Richard, and that's natural. But now you're learning to set healthy boundaries, and that's an important step in your healing journey." I had also joined a support group for parents of adult children with behavioral issues. The stories I heard there helped me realize I wasn't alone in my struggles. Martha, whose daughter had battled addiction for 20 years, became a particular friend and support. We often met for coffee after group sessions, sharing our progress and setbacks. Patricia and Emma had moved into a small apartment about 15 minutes from my condo. The house I had donated was now being used by New Beginnings as transitional housing for 3 families escaping abusive situations. Kathleen, my contact at the organization, occasionally sent me updates about the positive impact the house was having, though she never shared specific details about the residents to protect their privacy. Emma visited me every Saturday. We baked cookies, worked on art projects, and sometimes just talked. At 9 years old, she was remarkably resilient, though she occasionally asked difficult questions about her father. "Why did Daddy hit you, Grandma?" she asked one Saturday as we rolled out dough for sugar cookies. I had prepared for this question with Dr. Miller's help. "Your daddy has trouble controlling his anger sometimes," I explained carefully. "He's learning better ways to handle his feelings now. What happened wasn't your fault, and it wasn't mine either. Mom says he has to take special classes before he can visit without the other lady watching," Emma said, referring to the supervised visitation Richard had been granted. "That's right. He's learning how to manage his anger in healthier ways." Emma seemed satisfied with this explanation and returned her attention to cutting star shapes from the cookie dough. I marveled at her ability to adapt to the dramatic changes in her life. Children are so resilient when given the support and stability they need. Patricia had found a position as a charge nurse at a different hospital, with better hours and slightly higher pay. She was also attending therapy both individually and with Emma. Slowly, she was rebuilding her confidence and independence after years of Richard's controlling behavior. "I keep asking myself how I let things get so bad," she confided during one of our weekly lunches. "I'm a nurse. I've had training in recognizing domestic abuse. But when it was happening to me, I made excuses. I told myself it wasn't really abuse because he never hit me. Until Thanksgiving, I finished for her. We both made excuses for him, Patricia. We both wanted to believe he would change without consequences. Richard himself was a more complicated story. After his arrest outside my condo, he had been ordered to complete an anger management program. Initially, he had approached it with resentment and minimal effort. But as the weeks passed and he realized that neither his former firm nor his family were going to simply forgive and forget, something seemed to shift. 3 months into the program, he called me. It was our first direct communication since Thanksgiving. I answered with trepidation, half expecting more accusations and threats. "Mother," he said, his voice lacking its usual aggressive edge, "I've been advised by my therapist that part of my recovery involves making amends. I'd like to meet with you if you're willing." I consulted with Dr. Miller before agreeing to a meeting in a public coffee shop. Margaret insisted on accompanying me and sat at a nearby table, keeping a watchful eye on our interaction. Richard looked different, thinner, with shadows under his eyes and a new humility in his posture. He had found a position at a much smaller law firm, though at a significantly reduced salary. The divorce was proceeding, and he had accepted the custody arrangement, focusing instead on completing the requirements to move from supervised to unsupervised visitation with Emma. "I've been doing a lot of thinking," he said, staring into his coffee cup rather than meeting my eyes. "About Dad, about how he always gave me everything I wanted, about how I've been treating you and Patricia and even Emma. I've been a terrible son, a terrible husband and father." He finally looked up, and I was startled to see tears in his eyes. "I'm sorry, Mother. For Thanksgiving. For everything before that. I know sorry isn't enough, but I am in treatment now. Real treatment, not just the court-ordered classes." I listened carefully, searching for the manipulation that had characterized so many of his previous apologies. But this felt different. There was a rawness to his admission, a lack of the polished charm he usually employed. "I appreciate your apology, Richard," I said carefully, "and I'm glad you're getting help. That's what I wanted all along. But trust takes time to rebuild, and some things can't be undone." He nodded, accepting this without argument. "I understand. I wanted you to know that I'm trying. Really trying this time." We parted with an awkward handshake rather than a hug. I wasn't ready for more, and to his credit, Richard seemed to understand that. As spring turned to summer, our family continued its slow, tentative healing process. Richard maintained his treatment program, gradually earning the right to unsupervised visits with Emma every other weekend. Patricia reported that he was more respectful of her boundaries and actually paying his child support on time. Our mother-son relationship remained formal and cautious, limited mostly to brief conversations when he picked up or dropped off Emma. I had begun volunteering at New Beginnings one afternoon a week, helping residents with practical tasks like budgeting, resume writing, and navigating social services. The work gave me purpose and perspective. Many of these women had endured far worse abuse than I had, yet they were finding the courage to rebuild their lives. Their strength inspired me daily. One warm evening in late August, I sat on my small balcony, watching the sunset and reflecting on the tumultuous past 9 months. My knee had finally healed completely. I had made new friends through my support group and volunteer work. I had established healthier boundaries not just with Richard but in all my relationships. My phone chimed with a text message from Patricia, containing a photo of Emma proudly holding up a drawing she had made in her summer art class. It showed 3 stick figures, a small one in the middle holding hands with 2 larger ones. Family was written across the top in colorful letters. Looking at that simple drawing, I felt a profound sense of peace. Our family had been broken, but not beyond repair. The shape of it had changed, the connections between us reconfigured, but we were finding our way forward with greater honesty and respect. The lesson had come late in my life and at great cost, but it was one worth learning. Real love doesn't mean endlessly tolerating mistreatment. Sometimes the most loving thing you can do, for yourself and for those who are hurting you, is to stand firm, set boundaries, and insist on change. At 67, I had finally learned that respect must be the foundation of any healthy relationship, even between parent and child. I've shared this story not to vilify my son or to portray myself as a perfect mother. I was far from it, but in the hope that someone else might recognize these patterns in their own life and find the courage to act before a moment of violence forces their hand. If you're making excuses for someone who consistently treats you with disrespect, please know that you deserve better, regardless of your age or relationship to that person. If my story has resonated with you in any way, I would be grateful if you would share it with someone who might need to hear it. Perhaps leave a comment below about a time when you had to set a difficult boundary with someone you love. Have you ever had to take a stand that was painful but necessary? Your experiences might help others feel less alone in their struggles. Thank you for listening to my story. Remember that it's never too late to stand up for yourself, to insist on being treated with dignity and respect. I wish you strength, courage, and healing in your own journey, whatever challenges you may be facing. Please like this video if it touched you in some way, subscribe for more stories of resilience and transformation, and share it with anyone who might benefit from hearing that they're not alone. Take care of yourselves and each other.